Hello everyone, and welcome to the 2016 Halloween Countdown. Oh, I never get to do that. I will be your host, the Slug Lady. For the next 13 days, I will be looking at various different Halloween and horror movies that I have never seen before. All these vlogs are going to be unscripted, which is probably going to be more terrifying than the actual movies themselves. So please join me on this trip of terror, as today we look at Extraordinary Tales. So, Extraordinary Tales is actually an anthology of 5 different Edgar Allan Poe stories. It's all been animated by the same animation team. So there is The Mask of the Red Death, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Telltale Heart, Pin and the Pendulum, and one that I've never actually read before called let's see if I'm reading this right, The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. So I am a gigantic Edgar Allan Poe fan. Edgar Allan Poe was probably one of the first horror writers that I ever read something by. Something I've always loved about Poe is how he was always able to mesh the psychological and the supernatural so well. It's never one or the other, it's always a bit of both. So yeah, for not knowing about M. Valdemar, I really have no excuse. But I was really excited when I saw this in the store because I love Edgar Allan Poe retellings, I love animation, so I figured I'd take a look because I've never really seen this company before. Now, if you look at the cover, then your first impression might be the same as mine, which is that the majority of these shorts would be 2D animation. But in fact, they're not. So the company that did this was Melusine. These are the guys who did Song of the Sea. And really, I wasn't expecting CGI animation. In fact, when I first noticed that it was mainly CGI animation, I got a little worried. When I see CG show up in anything these days, I get really worried that it's just some kind of giant cop-out, that they're just trying to cash in on the CG buck. And lo and behold, I was completely wrong in every way possible. Not only does it look fantastic, but when I looked at the extras, I found out that the whole point of this movie, besides to tell Edgar Allan Poe stories, was to also play with the limits of CGI in ways that we usually don't see it. So for instance, one of the people on the team talked about how in the old days of 2D animation, you could always tell what company was behind said animation. You could tell that's a Disney, that's a Warner Brothers, that's a DreamWorks. But these days with CG, it's a little bit hard to separate everything without having the trademark at the beginning of trailers. A lot of CG is all done in the same style. Like the Disney princesses, you can tell those are Disney because they all use the same face. But really, without that trademark at the beginning of movies and trailers, we wouldn't really be able to tell which company was behind it. Sausage Party, for instance, is an adult movie, but is done in those same styles that you see in CGI kids movies. It's done in the same style as Toy Story. So the animation team were kind of hitting a rough patch. They were in the middle of an animation that wasn't really going so well. It was a feature film, but they were hitting a dry spell, and they thought about actually doing some experiments with animation, and they decided to use the works of Edgar Allan Poe to do that. So each of these stories are told in very different art styles. So for instance, the House of Usher is done in a style that looks like stop motion wooden figures. And they actually created like new formulas to create the special cross-hatching shading that is on all of the characters. And it looks really good. The House of Usher specifically actually managed to trick my brain a few times. I would see movement of hair or movement of characters, and for a moment it would feel like that was actually stop motion animation. Then we have the Telltale Heart, which is done with black and white shadows superimposed on the images. Kind of gets that same feel as the video game White Knight or the black and white parts from Sin City. And Valdemar is done in this old 50s comic book style, so we've got the thick shading. A lot of times it feels like a living comic, not like a motion comic. This feels much more put together than a motion comic usually does. And the main character just happens to look like Vincent Price, which is one of my favorite horror actors, so kudos. And they did actually combine 2D animation with the CG in that one. The Pit in the Pendulum is photorealism, and then finally the Mask of the Red Death is done in the style of an oil painting. So again, same kind of concept as the 50s comic book, except instead of a living comic book, it looks like a living oil painting. And there is so much color and so many different techniques done in each of these different animations that it really was a treat to watch. And then we get one more story. In between the traditional Edgar Allan Poe stories, we get another story involving a talking raven who is in the cemetery chatting with a mysterious voice that at first we think might be the statues in the cemetery. And it's done in this beautiful papercraft style. I think the actual sets were papercraft, and then they added in the CGI with the effects and the raven. And then in between each of the stories, we get a little bit more information about this mysterious voice and the raven. And along with the fantastic score of this movie, we have Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi, Julian Sands, Roger Corman, and Del Toro, to name a few. My favorite is probably Bela Lugosi's, which was an old recording of Bela Lugosi reading The Telltale Heart that they were able to find. They got a really good quality of it, and they used that in their story of The Telltale Heart, and it's awesome. It sounds like an old radio drama. It probably is. As each of the stories unfold, we find out that the Raven is in fact Edgar Allan Poe. And that's not too much of a spoiler because that comes out pretty quick in the movie. You can guess it right away. The voice calls him poet, and they start reciting lines of poetry of Edgar Allan Poe's writings. I don't know why he's a raven. Most likely irony. And then it is slowly revealed to us that the voice talking to him is in fact Death. And we get little bits of Poe's past. We find out little things about him, his obsession with death, the loved ones he lost at an early age, and it really gives a good feeling to like how distraught this guy was for most of his life. He did not have a very happy life. And each of these stories are to help us learn a little bit more about Poe and his own psyche, and at the end of the movie he finally decides he's ready to move on. Now, I'd say the weakest one out of the list of shorts was probably The Telltale Heart. They didn't really do very much that was new with the story. They did a lot that was new with the animation, but I guess that can't be helped because the voiceover that they did was a voiceover that had been taken a long time ago, so they couldn't exactly make changes to that. Now, if you are a big fan of Edgar Allan Poe like I am, then you'll probably really like this. But if you're looking for reinterpretations of the old stories of Edgar Allan Poe, this one, it tries new things. It does a lot of new things with the animation, but not too many new things with the story, except for the Mask of the Red Death. In the Mask of the Red Death, there is no narration. In fact, there is one line of dialogue the entire movie. Everything else is told through the oil paintings. And it's, again, really, really nice and well done. So if you're looking for modern reinterpretations, you're not going to get that with this. You're going to get the classic stories with very cool looking animation with them. So that was my review of Extraordinary Tales. Definitely a cool looking movie. And I guess I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next movie. Remember to like, fave, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye.